Tene ta tanong ngadu kapsu ta tangbo ta semni la tasul namba yege na ne nipa njoto ne tawa se ta chitang juma ga ondo se na njoto ne tawa sung de wara la ta tangbo neto ne tawa de sung tene nipa njoto ne tawa Joto ne tawa se de ta nam to je ba nam to je ne nam to je ngo la tawa re la tene te ta pota hi nam jar ga the ni ga nam to song na tene nam to len ji ji ba se ta te nam to len ji ji ba re la ta te ta su de hyu ne 다 단다 도공가 값을 해야 돼. 되네 다데 네 조소 네 따와데 되네. 되네 조소 네 따오게 따인도 못해 버려라. 단다 춘테 두바
This morning we talked about the different ways to look at the mind itself. And so here we looked at the first two of these ways to look at mind itself. So looking at the mind in stillness and looking at the mind in motion. And so the first is to, and so the second, looking at the mind in motion, is when a thought is arising, when a thought has arisen, then to look at the nature of that which has arisen. So this is looking directly at the essence, looking at the nature of that which has arisen. And this is what Tapo Tashi Namgyal calls in his instruction manuals. He calls this the thoughts or the co-emergent thoughts. And so this is looking at the thoughts in motion. Now, here that we have, now in this afternoon session, now that we have been looking at the thoughts, looking at the essence of thoughts, looking at the nature of the thoughts, now in relation to that, we need to have the recognition, so the recognition of the moving mind. And this is the 6th of the sessions on insight.
Tene ta te yang ta jerdo tanda sem ne pick up inayan ra nom to nju kap inayan ra te tene ta ti ge sem ni ge ne lu go on de se na ponjur shi da jong lo mare la sen ne pick up ji sem ni ge ne lu de yon ngo tong la rang yin salwa ta te ta bu je yo la te yendo number to banju kalsulaya no to go te khandi ji ware sena ti tagarang ne tang je ma to misal ke tene ne pe kala tene chuni seni ke ne tang te yaga jela nju ke kala du anda bota nju ke kala yaga anda botela ne pe kala du anda bote kan yo mare ta korang ne tang te no to njo na yo tagarang semji ne tang te nom to manju ne pe ka yin na yo tagarang re la tene ta teacher na ta tanda te ne pe kap la pe chi she ni tene ne to ne ta wa ta ne to ngo tre pa ti ko tene njo kap la pe chi she ni nom to njo la pe chi she ni nom to njo ngo la ta wa ta nom to njo ngo ge ta ne ngo tre pa te ta ti chi pa na kin re la tene ti ge chitang ge ngara su tu jing ge chorwa da bo che na tene ne pe kap la te che gam ya po da bo ta njo kap la gam me pa da bo sor ge yo re te yin na ya sen ni ge ne lu la che par chi da kan yo ma re.
In general, whether the mind is at rest in stillness or whether the mind is in motion, there is not a whole lot of difference. There's not a whole lot of change in the actual way the mind is, in the actual nature of the mind. And so sometimes so when the mind is settled, when the mind is resting, then at that time, its nature is empty and clear, and at the time that there are lots of thoughts moving, when the mind is moving, it's just the same. It's not any different. And so, in particular, we often might think that at the time that the mind is resting, that the Dharma nature is better, and that at the time that it's moving, that it's worse. But it's not really that way. And we might also think that when the mind is moving, that the nature is good, and when the mind is still, that the nature is bad. But really, it's not like that either. It's really that it's just that. It's just that at all times. Whether or not it's staying or whether or not it's moving, it's really just that. And so, for that reason, at the time. For that reason, when we look at the mind when it's resting, we have the methods for looking at the mind and the methods for recognizing it. And then in the same way, we have, when the mind is moving, we have the methods for looking at the mind and the instructions on recognizing the mind. And these are, we might think to ourselves that this is, that when it is good, that this is, or that when we are resting, normally, that's what this note means. Normally we think to ourselves that when we are resting, that is good meditation, that is what we want in the meditation, that when thoughts are moving, that is, and then when the mind is moving, that meditation is not any good. However, in terms of the way that the mind actually is, there is not a whole lot of distinction between these two.
Tene ta tela yang tanda khande to go ge ware se na ta chitang ge topa mepe ge kapta tene topa nam to chi pe ge kap che te tene sem ne pe kap ton ju kap che sem ke topa tela tene zongin tang ta ti ge ne tang te ne kap ge no cha ge on de se na te la che pra yo re te yin na yang ne sha ge on de se na che pra chung si chung me ba tene ta kap de na la song na sal ri gemba se na salwa ripa gemba ra to ba ta khorang khande yin ba te to pa te la tene sung yo re la tene ta te yang te la tongbo te la chorwanda bo te la khande yung ge ware se na topa te pa sal topa te tongbo ngu zong tene topa te pa yal topa te yal song du te la tene ta tanda seni ge nelu topa ge chorwa te chunga mayin ba tende mayin ba Koran tol ji topa di jie ge yo re la topa di jie un di topa di ge ngo de koran jie ma nyu tong ba yin ba da la tni topa de ta topa lo ngon che ba yin sung ge yo re la tni di ge ne pa ta topa ta nam to njo wa song la tni ji ba na yin topa je ta de la di ge non di ge ne tsu de gong ge yo re
What we need to realize here is at the times that there are no thoughts, or at the times when there are thoughts, so at the times when the mind is resting and at the times when the mind is moving, the idea that good and bad and better or worse are distinctions in how it appears. In terms of the appearance, there is a distinction, but in terms of the essence, there really is no distinction. The essence is the same. And so this is what we call the clear, aware, and naked. So it is this clear, aware, and naked, it is said in here. I can't remember how it's translated in here. The clear, aware, and naked here. And so what this point is, when we look directly at the at the nature of the mind as it is, we realize it just as it is, clear, aware, and nakedly, just as it is. And so at that point, what sort of feeling is it that arises at that point? When we have a thought that arises, when this thought arises and it's clear and we can identify it, sometimes it seems like it disappears. And you might think that when it disappears, that's the time that you see the mind itself. But actually that is not quite right. At the time that, very time that the thought arises, that also, the essence of the mind is there also at that time. And so when you look at it and see the essence at the moment that the thought arises, then you see that at that moment that the essence of that thought is not experienced as arising. And so the thought in its essence and how so the thought and the way it appears and its essence are all in a way the same. And so in this way, in relation to this, we meditate upon the way that it is.
Tene ta te la tene ngune se na tene topa sinkin ta mtopa sinkin te semge nde topa nde mtopa re samne ni su chepa re ma to ngoma tenji on de se na topa ye pa ya topa mepa ya nika ngo chikpa nagi nelu chikpa nagi ma to yo mare la teni te hakko go yo re teni teacher na ngoma topa ge ne tang te ma hiba topa te je topa te gam la parchi se teni te mari pandabo gam mai pandabo je la chungwa re la ta topa rang ngo la nam to rang ngo la ta ve kapso teni topa khorang te sanji nelu ha re do re riba yi ra re do re la teni teacher na topa chi na endra topa njo na endra topa manju na endra tingo de teni tikwa mato tenji nelu njurwa yo mare.
So really, when we think about this is thinking and this is not thinking, or this is thought, this is non-thought, when we label it as this is thinking, this is thought, and this is non-thought, then this is really just something that we are doing with our minds. It is just labeling it with our minds. Really, in terms of the way that they are, in terms of their essence, they are the same. And this is something that we need to know. And so when we have thoughts, that the way that the thoughts are, when they arise, we do not recognize them as thoughts. And so at that point, we have this ignorance of not knowing the thoughts, this unknowing about how the thoughts are. And then when they arise and we see the essence of the thought, we see that the essence of the thought is just the essence of the mind itself. It is just the essence of wisdom itself. And so at that point, whether or not we have thoughts or whether or not we have non-thoughts, really it's the same. There's really no difference. And the essential way that it is does not change.
다 되게 저도네 못해봐 다 단다 당보 단다 따와 그다네 다 단다 춘팅이바 혼통 그 춘팅이바데 저도네 따와 다 띵고테 베가살라 혼통 그 춘팅 두바 테네 저도네 못해봐 다 되니 냠도 자르네 다 냠냠스 뇽나 다 되게 단다 네토네 따와라 저도네 따위게 살도 송아도 땡도 송 테네 네토도 못해발리 저도라 못해발리 다 레라르 송한다 보다 검 여르 송한다 보다 텐데 용기 와레라 테네 다 준신 티처나 단다 다보다 희남자게 세니 렌지지바 추지고 농아 렌지지바 추 농도 렌지지바 추그 짤세 다 그런 추그 짤데 데 지금 본주른다 보지 농도 근조한다 보지 용기 와레데 이나에 되게 뭐데 기반다 보지 레숭기 와레 다 대지에서 다 혼통거 뭐데 탑 선바데 데는 농도네 따와래라 농도네 따와데 다 되게 농아동 세니 일미도 따와 따와텔 거기 오래라 되니 대야 다지당게 노아 생기때 당가란서 샘지 땡들라 샤르위게 노아텔라 거기 오래
다시 앞에 답은 만져기 롱데
노아 샘니 렌지지바 추치고 세나 샘니 렌지지바 테네 nomto lenji jiba chuku zal no lenji jiba chuku we 생긴다 보다 텐데서 디솜데
semni fanchike ba chugo no achike ba chugosa
nomto lenji jiba chuku zal no lenji jiba chuku we
And so this is the section on recognizing the mind in motion, so recognizing the nature of the mind in motion. And so here we had looking at the nature of the mind in motion, and that was the second of the Dharma sessions. And then we had recognizing the mind in motion, and this is the sixth of these sessions. And so here Rinpoche thought that combining these two would go well with your experience. And so now here, in terms of this, sometimes we think of looking at the mind in at the mind in stillness as being easier, the mind in motion as being more difficult. But this, really, when we think about it, if we listen to the words of Tapo Tashi Namgyal, then he said that the co-emergent mind itself is the Dharma body. The co-emergent thought is the clarity of the Dharma body. And the co-emergent appearances are the radiance of the Dharma body. So the co-emergent mind itself is the Dharma body. Here, this is just the nature of the Dharma body, how it is. And then the thoughts that arise are like the clarity, the clearness of the Dharma body. And so this is, there is no sense that there is any better or worse in these. So this is what Dabo Tashi Namgyal said. Now the third section is looking at the mind in appearances. So looking at the mind in terms of appearances. And here the basic point of this is that we are to see that appearances and the mind itself are indivisible. And so the appearances, when we talk about appearances, what they are is something that appears in relation to the mind or on top of the mind. The appearances shine in relation to the mind.
Tene tateyang tangpo nongwa tamchi semchirang yin bala tengi yorela. Tene tateyang nongwa semchirang yin bate la chitang ta ngaransu jiba ke rikpi ke ong tse na ta ngaransu susi jiu tongsul la tene nongwa te chirul ke duldu trupi ngu pore ngupo pembore nang semte hipasari ke nambare teni ngo tate pare sambanda boji yore teni ngo tate pare sambanda boji yore te yina yin tenji ondu se na teni nwa te tanda chirola yomare tati chiro dodu tuba yomare sen teni tati semsam paripa teni tena paundu tera teni chitang pumbo sena ngupo rakpa tenzo mambo ndupa chela teni tere samba renda botan teni kangbanda botan teni hintanda laso bata tenzo ngupo kanga ngupo toma ndupa la teni shargi yore mato ngunige tatanda dodu te tupa kanya yomare la ta tingu po rapa tenzo yang hepto samutana tene dulchin mambo che ndupa re mato tene ta tige ngu po rapa tenzo yomare la dulchin mambo ndupa kombo che la ta dulchin tenzo la yang ta hepto ta na tene te tombo topna tene dulchin yang rangi hinji madu bandabo ta tene ta chay tongi yore la ta wana 노원 된저 간디지 샤르게 요아레세나 노원 된저 물럼 따도 샤게 요아레스 별나 가란주 물럼 제가설라야 르다 강바다 데네 조다 조다 낙살라서 봐 샤르게 요아레 노 샤르게 요아레 데 이나야 드나랑 우스 데 요아레베세나 드나랑 우스 다데다오제 요아레베세나 돌도 투파근 뭐 도도라고 요아레베세나 요마레 me yendo la char chogi warela pe te yendo ngarang su senje no atam ji chung te tar do chargi ware sitate jipa ka ripe go na tena papa te no atam ji sen ba temba.
So here, what is first taught in this section is that that appearances are the mind by nature. So that by nature, appearances are the mind. And if we want to think about this in terms of inference, if we want to use inference to figure this out, normally, for us ordinary individuals, in what we see, it seems like the external appearances that we see are outside, and they are composed of particles, and they're material objects that we see outside of ourselves. And the mind is not like that. The mind is something that is internal and is this clear knowing awareness that we have. And so these two seem to be really quite different. But actually, in terms of the way they actually are, they are not. The appearances are not actually outside of ourselves. And so, if we think about this in terms of the logics of the mind only, or Chittamatra, the mind only school, then if you think about all of the coarse or the big external objects that we might have, like or mountains, or houses, or trees, or things like that, they are all a bunch of different things that are put together and assembled to make one bigger thing. So there are a whole bunch of things that are put together in order to make this one thing, but there's no real solid thing that you can say is just that. There's no one solid thing that you can say is just that mountain or house or anything. Rather, there are a whole bunch of other things that are put together. And then if you look at all of these components, all of the things that they're put together from, then you see that these are all just big conglomerations of all the molecules that there are in them. They're just all, it's just like one big bundle of all the molecules, and there's nothing about that is inherently real either. And then if you start looking at the molecules and you start to divide them and look at them, you can divide them into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller parts, and eventually you'll find that that in terms of their nature, they can't be proven to, or they can't be actually established in their nature. They cannot be proven to really exist. And so these, this is how they are. They cannot be proven to actually exist. Well, then how is it that these appearances appear to us, that these appearances arise for us? In terms of the mind-only school, then it is talked about like being a dream. It's like in the appearance of a dream. In a dream, we can see a mountain, or we can see houses, we can see our friends, we can see forests and all sorts of things. And so you wonder, are these things actually there? And the answer is no, they're not actually there. But that doesn't, but even though they are not there, they still appear to us. And so they are really, in this way, they're just the appearances of the mind. Yet they aren't actually there, but they appear to us. So they are nothing other than just an appearance of the mind itself. And so this is the logic that we can use to establish that appearances are mind through inference.
Tene ta tetardo ta ngaranchoge megi yordo zo thongata navi yordo datupata nai yordo tsorwata je yordo ro nyongata luji yordo riza nyong kanga je ta ngaranchog noala chiruldo hyargi yorete yenayang uni jena ngarang semjingola hyargi yo perna zau da woje la te na zau te ngune tne nang sem la hyaryo re ma to rang sem la hyarwa ta tne yin ji sem la hyarwa ni de te chi ngo ka da woje yo re la teacher na tne no ate san yin ba la hi ba ta te che le tang bo pa la te si ya ka le kha da bo ji chang na ta ti ge no sam sing ge te chi tang ge chirul ge zu ba yin na yo nang ge sam la den chi nam ba la kharwa tene yul ji nam ba la kharwa chorwe nam ba la kharwa ta sam ji nam ba la kharwa ma bo yo de la di no a te tam ji jong tene sen ji ngo ta yer mi to ye ba sam de ngo rang yin ge tong ba yin ba la tene no a ten zo ngo rang yin ge tong ba yin ba la hi ba de tene no zo ne ta ba re.
And so in this way, when we look at any of the different objects, when we look at the form that appears to the eye, or the sound that appears to the ear, the scent that appears to the nose, or the taste that appears to the tongue, or the touch that appears to the body, in terms of how they appear, at first to us they appear as if they are external, but really in terms of how they actually are, they are just the appearances of the internal mind. And so it is the form. If we take the example of looking at a form, we look at the form and it seems like it's something that is outside of us, but actually it is nothing other than what appears to the mind itself. It is something other than. It is nothing other than what arises to the mind itself. And so and we can also see this because we can see that the forms that appear in our own minds and the forms that appear in other people's minds, when we're looking at the same thing, what appears to me and what someone else sees, these are different. There are different appearances that arise in the minds. Now, sometimes this is difficult for beginners to understand. And if it's difficult for you to understand, then you can also think about it in terms of what appears to the internal mind in terms of the various generalities that appear to the internal mind. The generalities are the ideas of things that we have in our own mind. These are what we call in technical terms the general meaning. So in terms of the general meaning that we have, rather than looking at a specific object and seeing that specific object, rather this is like our concept of what something might be. Now back to what Rinpoche said, away from my footnote. So when we look at these generalities that appear to our mind, when we look at the various feelings or thoughts or conceptions that appear in our minds, then we can see that these things that appear are nothing other, the feelings and etc. that appear are nothing other than the nature of our mind. There is no difference of them. You cannot say that they're anything different than our mind, and you can see that they are by essence the mind itself. And so this is how we look at the nature of appearances themselves.
Tene ta te tardo ta te nungzu ne tawa ta te la nungwa lenji ji ba chuku he singi te la ta te nungzu ne ngote pa te la tene ta ti ge zo ngote pa te tanda ngaranzu sem je nungcha la hyarwe ge ta perna pesha wa ge se na tenchi se ge tenchi se du yul ra mai ba yul ji namba la tupa hi ji number hi pe ngo la yul ji namba hyarwa je Yulji Nambala Herwa, Yulji Nambatan Dawajera, Yulji Nambala Herwa Tela, Tenchi Segi Orel. Tenchi Teta, Tini taken the Sanji Tenti Tinyon, Chorwa de Dula Soba Tenzo, Tini Tingola Taundu, Tini Tati Senlet Kakayo Marella, Sam Rang Tile Sen Kakayo Yomarella, Sam Don Tipayan Yomare, Kapkala Tinjura Tangi Orella. Teacher na tati no ate ngo tomba imbate ngo la nyambrika patela tati nonzo ni ngo tepa ndapore.
The something old the and it don't this sort of some sharwa this sort of
Herwa teta samni ngo tipa ngo tipa.
Kakala ngo tipa mayimba shagi.
Ngo shargi yore di na tandu ngo tipa ma to yung tayo marwa.
Well, I gave my footnote about the generalities a little bit earlier. Rinpoche explained it himself. So here, when we look at so this is looking at the mind in, looking at the appearances in mind, and so following that, and so this is looking at it and seeing the appearances as the radiance of the Dharma body. And so next is the section on recognizing the mind and appearances. And so here what is primarily talked about in recognizing is recognizing the aspect of appearance, recognizing what the appearances are. And when appearances arise in our mind, they are what we, in terms of books, call, or what we scholars would call the meaning generality or the generality. And so this is like the aspect or the appearance of the object that arises in the mind. It's not the object itself, but it's like that part of the, when you see something, it's like the image or aspect of it that arises in your mind. And so it is like the image of the object that arises in your mind. And so when we have a generality like this arise in our mind, when we have this sort of image of something that arises in our mind, and then we can look at it and we see it, and then there are feelings of happiness or pleasant or feelings of unpleasant that arise in relation to this. And we look at the nature of these and we see that the natures of these are really no different than the essence of the mind. The natures of these are really the same as the nature of the mind. Now, in terms of how they appear, it seems like they might be different than the nature of the minds, but in terms of how they actually are, these are nothing other than the nature of the mind.
Tene ta tege nongzo ngote bata nongzo ngote bata tanda chuntin dambate songarela tene ta tering te zam siena chwa tang nangkin yona chwa naru.
And so that was recognizing the mind and appearances, and this is the 7th of the Dharma sessions. And so we will leave it here for today, and now we have some time for questions if you have any.
Rinpoche, thank you. Over the last several days, I've had a question in my mind, and I've been debating about whether or not I should ask it. Kind of going back and forth. Should I ask it? Should I not ask it? I think it's probably too personal to ask. It's probably inappropriate. I shouldn't ask it. So a couple of days ago, when you taught about the 5 faults that should be eliminated, and particularly the faults of doubt and regret, I was kind of amused, and I've been amused with myself. But anyway, that's incidental to the question itself. I've decided to ask the question, and whether or not it's silly or not silly, just going to ask it, and whatever arises is fresh. My question is one that's asked quite a bit, and this is my version of it. And the question is, who is the root guru? My story about this, or question about this, is that several years ago I heard His Holiness the Dalai Lama on the radio, and that was definitely a life-changing experience. And it was just a general interview. It wasn't a Dharma talk, but what he said was extremely resonant within me, and I thought about it again and again and again, and I began reading his books and listening to him whenever I could. And through his blessings, a great change occurred within myself. For instance, I'd been looking for something of meaning in my life for a very long time, and I realized that the only thing that ever would cause me any sort of happiness at all was bodhicitta. And this sort of recognition was really quite revolutionary, and through this bodhicitta and recognizing its value, I began to have a little bit of recognition of the fact of the no self, no difference between self and other. So through that, through His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I got a little bit of recognition of my mind. And recently I heard Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche say that the root guru, or at least the specific Kagyu instruction about who the root guru is the one who shows you the nature of mind, your mind. And so since I've heard the Dalai Lama years ago, and have developed interest in Buddhism, and looked to other teachers and read their teachings and tuned into them, I have the same sort of experience with many teachers, including yourself, Rinpoche. I looked for a teacher for quite a while and took the traditional advice to choose your teacher carefully. And so when I finally came here a couple of years ago, I was extremely grateful to Rinpoche, and was just extremely struck by your simple, very simple but extraordinary kindness. And that resonated with me in much the same way as it did with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And the same is true when I say Karmapa Cheno and look at His Holiness Karmapa's picture. And so there are these different teachers who are all wonderful, and I have this instruction that the root guru is the one who shows you the essence of your mind, or your mind's nature. And I can't really say that one over another shows me that. Perhaps I have yet to meet the teacher for me. I know some people are very clear about this, that one teacher is their root guru. But anyway, I'm interested to hear what Rinpoche has to say. Thank you.
도두다 치탄 짜와라메데 가레레스 드네 공게 치탄 로마봉에나 안에 겨우는 비시기 인터뷰 치 라디오 코네데 데베무케네 드네 드네 데라 캠포카라기 총라 안에 총라 짜와라메데 성기노 ngotrkende sula samgi ngotre chena de tsawelamre songre tene de ane lama kebrachen mamboyore Rinpoche rangyore sene ane gyawan Rinpoche rangyore sene Nishinobu rangyore sene tsawelame de kante tsagre sene de sure trabo
zoode Tela tene tsawelamala tachitanga rang semge ngote sepala tene tsawelama samnayon digi warela te mai nayon tene 다 자vel lama singite rang loti jorsa ndago 다 엔딩 ngala 단다 롬 yang takpati tengre 디게 롬망 휴 딘디 템바yin 가든 치슈 딘데yin sambatabo 제라 tene 다 자vel lama singite rangi endla lotina 엔딩에 당와 되나나 되게 페인토사리 삼바타블라 tene 단다 되게 와래라 tene tel라 지탕게 산진네 룽오테 발라 자올라마자나요 되게 요레테 옛나야 산진네 룽오테 예바다 산진네 룽오테 메바 tene 다 단다 지탕게 티바 쳔보다 tipa chungoda songho doje tipata songho doje tipalaya saji jeji nanjur lana mepeje ta tindegi nyamle mambu yorela tenzu sosola zaolama yore teni senji ngote singinte tanda chitanga shaji chimbuta zokwa chimbu rang kabla ta tanda perna tanda marik meselta tene chukun subsu ta tene ngira chaje chim ngira janso ndabota tende ke tene rimbe gamne senji ngontre pata tende jila senji ngontre segi yore la teacher na senji ngontre sinkin la ya zaw lama la zona yun dige yore la chitanga ta rang tepa to mugu yepa la tene silap jupa ndabo ta tende yona tel zaw lama zona dige ba.
When you talk about the root Lama, if you say that the root Lama is the person who introduces you to the nature of your mind, then that is okay. That's fine to say it that way. But you can also say it otherwise. You can also think of it otherwise. And so you can think of the root teacher, the root guru, as being like the main person from whom we get your instructions, your most important source of instructions. Where do they come from? And who is it who can teach you the correct path? Who is it who gives you the most helpful instructions? Who is it who is the kindest to you? And that is the person who is your root guru. That is your root Lama. And so it really depends upon your mind. And you need to look and examine your mind. And if you see that this is someone whose instructions are very beneficial to you, who is the most beneficial to you, then it is good to think of them as your root Lama. Now, in terms of introducing you to your mind, or not introducing you to the nature of your mind, there are different approaches in the different vehicles. There's the great vehicle instructions, the foundation vehicle or Hinayana instructions. There is the secret mantra of Vajrayana, and within the secret mantra of Vajrayana, there is the action tantra, the karma tantra, the yoga tantra, and the unsurpassed yoga tantra. And so these all have their own in each of these there's the particular meaning for what a root Lama is in each of these individual different places. When you talk about the root Lama as being the person who introduces you to the nature of your mind, then that is particularly in the context of the Great Seal and in the context of the Great Perfection or Dzogchen. Because in these you are given instructions on how to meditate, and you gradually meditate and then gradually come to a recognition of the nature of your mind. And so within this context, the person who introduces you, who brings you to this recognition, it would be okay to call that person your root guru. And so really what it is it's the person whom you have the most faith in, and you have the most devotion in, and from whom you are best able to receive the blessings. And if you call that sort of person your root Lama, then that is fine.
Thank you, Rinpoche.
Thank you, Rinpoche. I had a question personally on how to practice Mahamudra myself. I've been doing this for many years. Most days I do the preliminary practices for a while, and I've been doing them for many, many years. Then I do Karma body meditation and then insight. And to be honest, most days I have pretty good Karma body meditation, but my insight still lacks a lot of depth or at least certainty. But there are some days when, for whatever reason, I do more preliminaries. If I have real renunciation, genuine renunciation, not contrived, or uncontrived bodhicitta, when I do the insight practice, it has a real certainty and a real depth. So my question is, should I spend more time always trying to bring that into the practice, or do more along with, I think the instructions tend to say, and spend more time just looking at my mind?
Koran soso ginyamani korla lomampo ringla ane shogela ane ngondogom gyagere ste gyapsane tne shine teskom degi jesu tne hlatongom yores tne namjundo de ane shine de yabo rogodo tempo yabo yore ina hlatong chebe causal de la tne things up shida mendos tne de la things up shida mendos tne ngeshe shida kiege mendo inen kakala kongi pena ane ngondo de so mixer mambo gomna tne ngeshe kebrchen jula kene yana ane chanchu gisem kebrchen jula kene de la hlatong chebe kaso de la ane de ngeshe kiege tne things up double 통계를 드네 공개 카니체그레 드네 문돌라 믹네 드네데 녜셰타 찬추 기셈 믹세기 케고이나 시안나 트리다르나 아니 유림보 세마타그레스 유림보 드네 세마마보타그레스 파통게텐나
semla ta thig nando soja chimbu thig nando tatsul mangbo sungare la tinite ngaranso ta te tap number na chupa sungare ba tap number na chupa sungare de na tanji ngote ta lantong ngi hi yapo je na ta te khahi ngondo la tin je ge yore khahi ta tawala tin je ge yore tawaya tap number na chupa indu yenda de la tin je pa ta je ju ngo te ji pa indu de tin khora nyongto yapo je na te tagarang rig ba ti ten gomna tin te ti게 topa jipa ti게 팽게요 말에 topa jipa te 칸디레스는 topa 들 감고 그래 봐 감네 되니 배 ngandu jorne 다데 감도 녀모메 봐 대지 녀모 봐도 남도 늘도 반다 보제 정말 tinte야 버려라 대지 다데 전종 그래 ngondola tene jipa chongchu sanla tene jipa ta hinela tene jipa te nyongnyong rabo te yapu chunga re song
Generally, the instruction manuals give many different methods for looking at your mind, many different methods for generating realization. And so these are, there are many different methods that are given here. And so in general, what we need to do, the essence of all of these methods is that we need to generate this recognition. We need to generate the certainty and recognition of the nature of the mind. And so for some people that happens more easily through the preliminary practices. For some people it happens more easily through through looking. And so there are these different ways that it arises, and you should do whichever way it is that works for you. So you should do whatever it is for you that helps you generate that sort of realization. But when you have generated that realization, then just generating realization in itself is not enough. We also need to meditate. We need to meditate upon or in relation to. The Tibetan word literally means on top of. So we need to meditate on top of or in relation to that realization that's generated. And it is important to do this because it is said that it's by meditating upon this and by getting familiar with this that we are able to suppress and then eliminate the afflictions and the problems that we have. And so here it is important that that you sort of maintain this and that you maintain the continuum of doing this. And so this is what you need to do. You need to maintain this in your meditation. And so when it arises, whether it arises through the preliminary practices or whether it arises through the mind of enlightenment or whether it arises through your tranquility meditation, then all of that is very good.
Tashi Delag Rinpoche. I'm trying to form this question in relationship to the answer you just gave. I think it's related. But when we do the Mahamudra investigations on retreat, so I have two questions. Would it be a good idea to begin each session with a Guru Yoga? And secondly, when we're on retreat, how would we combine looking at the nature of, looking at moving mind with recognizing moving mind?
Tsam debe kaso de la tunje la tampo la ménage gomgreves gomna yapoyenas. Tu nipa de jutot la tawa ta ane jutot la ngotropa de ni kande chagres gomchepaso.
다텔라 단다 라면 난줄 때 가두이나에 검토나 기로 야보요래 다테 무구 검증 고르숨 바긴 생활한 수순 거여봐 무구 검증 고다고 임베잖아 전도 솔완데 검증을 주미 무구 제버신 질로스 때니스 라면 난줄라 때네 손데 시에나 때네 냠도 마지발라 냠도 제발라 템보통 살본로와 다 tinde기 제버려래 라 티체나 제버려래 때네 따와동 어떻게 나네 따와데 당보 다 나란서 롱관라보데 따와데 델라타니 띵오히다 teni ngoshi ni ngote sedu tel ta phachir ngarang thongjinde ngarang te ni nyom su nyonde insare samdu tel ngote singke te thaje kin da bota te tagara rindo ga te ngote gnan ta na te ngarang nyom su nyoya te da ngote ge non de ye pa te ni rigduge te na teni phachir thinking kind that the Korang won't trepate, Tinning Arang or Tati read those on the Motepala Kogreva.
Whenever you do Guru Yoga, it's fine. It's good to do Guru Yoga whenever you can. It's a very wonderful thing to do at any time. And this is because, as it is said, devotion is the head of meditation, it's taught. And so, as we say, then devotion is very important. It's like the, it's like the one who, it's like the most important, one of the most important things we can have for developing our meditation. So, as ones who continually separate, I'm sorry, I'm getting translations of this verse confused. So for as ones who continually supplicate the Guru who opens the gate to the treasury of oral instructions, so it is by making prayers and by having devotion and in generating devotion that we are able to generate realization where we have not had it before. And when we generate that realization, it helps us make it stable, and then when it is stable, it helps increase it and make it clear. And so, whenever you do it is very good. Now, in terms of the viewing and the recognition. Viewing is like when we first come up to a road and we have to figure out where does it go, how does it go, and then you're looking down and you say, okay, it goes here, and you're pretty sure that it goes there, and then recognizing is the point where you sort of realize this really is where it goes. And so the viewing is coming to the point where you say, yeah, it's probably this. This is probably what it is. And then the recognition is like you're deciding that it actually is this. You know, it's really what determines that this definitely is what it is. And so it's you looking at the experience that you have. And so you have this experience and looking at it and comparing it to what is said in the instructions, and then comparing them and saying, it's not a question of saying probably anymore. It's a question of saying, this is it. This is definitely it. And so that's what the recognition is.
Yeah. Thank you, Rinpoche.
Hello, Rinpoche. My question is about making the process of doing the Latong investigation with moving mind easier. When using this method, I have the experience that thoughts arise very, very quickly. They play themselves out very quickly, and they dissolve very quickly. So it's difficult to actually have the opportunity to study them, to look at them closely enough to see their essence. So my question about this is, does Rinpoche think that it's useful to kind of experiment with different methods in this section? For example, actually planning out discursive thoughts before the formal session. This is actually a serious question. Before the session, so that it's kind of easier to generate them more instantaneously and hold them a little more easily in the mind while looking at them. Or something like even begin a discursive process, such as choosing something to talk to myself about at a given moment, so that I can actually watch that process as it unfolds. I know that this is all very contrived, but it seems like that this Latong practice in particular is a contrived practice that should lead to helping us be able to see more clearly what's happening.
The judo lata kaso the kakala judo lata kala kapoire kaso namdo this gyobo kegyores, gyobo negres, gyobo yeldroires. The dembo sonsan de the chimagi tap double chit tangna digina the tap double chit tangna pena ani tungingena nga de double chit is namto kigin double samba kene de double chit kegores the ani chashe double chena the digela tumikasa the double ani chit kena the tap debo ins kare yore the yana the ngana digi quality sam tangin double sam the tungi kasa degi quality samtangne ane de tana ta debo yongsore drengyore de tes juma drabore de yene ane chetang jutolata tes juma drabo marbes juma drabo
Juman drabo marike ta tanda tegena so na namto juawam njor chukni sunkin drabo yoreba nyemo bai ta namto rakpa chepawam kier chukni sunkin drabo ta tinde yorela tinte kier chukna ndigi yoreba tinde yore.
It's not something that's contrived. But it does say in all the instruction manuals that if a thought arises, or if you make a thought arise, or if a coarse affliction arises, or if you make one arise, and so that would be okay.
Okay.
Rinpoche, I had a question about how we actually go about practicing all that you've been teaching us this week. Particularly all these different sessions, whether it's important that we actually begin at the beginning, regardless of how long we've been practicing or if we've meditated on an object before or not. And then in terms of going along, whether this should be done daily, regardless just how we feel about it, what seems to be beneficial, whether we should be doing it on retreat. and how long we should actually be doing these various sessions. So if we're trying to watch our mind, is it something we should be doing just small bits of or something longer?
Morangi namjindu nyamlan khande chekare supena tila ane rimpashin du tambo ane sula tawa ane de simba ane de shinegi mikrim shere ane de korim shindu chekare sina rangi sem rangi tsorodan tumpa chekare yang na ane deva miksegi korim gogiana de namjindu shine khato nike kat yana dela samde grebes yana namjindu tes kom grebes kante chegres tene tunde so ringtun kante kazuko gres
tene ta tela chitang tanda samde ni gomna yong de yorela ya ngarang chorwa sini gomna ya zendu sini gomna ya ndigirba tene ta tela ta tangbo le tangbo pa ina ta de devda himbula soba tende rimba yendala song yore mato tene gamne ta chitang zo ngaransu hine de temi la senza mataboda tene longla tene senza mataboda tende mangchi hyu nyamni nana tene sen nesha pemba je ndorna de ji sen la pemba sen la neba yung je kalche ge yore la sen la nesha pemba je tene lantong ge on de se na ta ngarang so ge ta je kapkala tawasi zo de kanlang ngun sing gore se na ngotre ge tene ngotre ba ngo hiba ta ti ngo hiba de tong to ba je kalche ge yore la tene ting tombo ngotre 다 내도 내 따위게 다 발체를 냠뇨 jel지나 디게 뇽와 디데나 냠버리가니 되네 가세 투투 쫑도 바제 양갑갈라 내도 내 따위게 내도 내 따와라 때네 원체나 양 주도 내 따위게 따위게 고니야 따니 되네 간디레기도 주도 내 나도 조가서 간디 용고도 양 다티 조다 탱게 세다 총게 세데 조치와디 롱 생기 용용 때니 가지라
If you do these practices in retreat, that's fine, or if you fit them in according to your feeling and what you need, then that is also fine. It's primarily in terms of beginners that the order of first looking at stones and then sticks and gradually going through all the different objects of the Tranquility Meditation is described. But for people who have some experience, what is primarily done is the unsupported Tranquility Meditation or the meditation upon the breath. And so that is what most people do. And these are very good for developing the stability, developing the resting aspect of the mind. So they're very good if you practice them. They will benefit you and help you develop this resting, stable aspect of your mind. And so that is the tranquility. In terms of the insight meditation, at times when you are doing insight meditation, you should do the viewing the mind. You should, for instance, view your mind in stillness. But after you've viewed your mind in stillness, what is really most important is to recognize it and to build that recognition. So it is of primary importance to be able to recognize the nature of your mind and then to be able to sustain and maintain and nurture that recognition. So what you do is you rest and you look at the resting mind, and then you rest in equipoise in relation to that experience. And so you look at that experience, you use that experience, and you recognize in that what is the essence of the resting. So you recognize in relation to that, and this is a good thing to do. And then sometimes when maybe you have developed a little bit of experience in terms of recognizing the nature of the resting mind, then it's good to look at the mind in motion and to look at the mind in motion, see what it's like, and as you look and you see what the mind in motion is like, then you can do the recognition of that. In terms of the duration of your sessions and how long you should do each particular type of practice, this is really something that you should judge for yourself based upon your own experience of your mind.
Tene ta tanda tawa ye ngote ye ta ngote te ngarang nyong tong tambare la tawa ye te tapena ngaranso saganang minu ra bra tene tangara jodo neta na yapondo sana jodo neta o tati la tezi kalindo ta no neto neta na yapodo sana neto neta te ya kapkala neto neta du o ta tel jodo ni ta na tel mixar chechu tomo mai ba jung sare song ya teta tende sine pena sagang minu da ori ka ne dong gudna te dom te gom tende sina tini ti nyamnyo ji jegrela nyamnyo de je yung kapsula tini ti nyamnyo ka tan la te se gom tini compare to ta tende nang ji bari.
In particular, we have the 4 lookings, or the 4 viewings, and the 4 recognitions. And so, of these, for the recognition, you should do them in accord with your mind. So you should keep them in. You should keep a track of what you can do with your mind, and do them in relation to your own mind. In terms of the looking, it's kind of like looking at a restaurant menu. And so sometimes on a restaurant menu there are many different things to choose from. And so someday you might think to yourself, oh, today I'd like to look at my mind in motion. and so then you look at your mind in motion. Or you think to yourself, oh, today I'd rather look at mind and appearance together. Or today I'd rather look at my resting mind, or something like that. So you look at your mind like that. And today I think I'll look at my mind in motion. Or you might think today, well, actually today if I look at my mind in motion, there is really some particular important point that I'm going to figure out. And so then you look at your mind in motion. And so you just do it that way. It's like being in the restaurant. You pick one thing and then you have it, and then you pick that one thing and you just meditate upon it. And as you meditate upon it, then some experience will arise. And when that experience arises, then just meditate on that experience, and then it will increase and develop. And so help it increase and develop.
Thank you for coming to Main Rinpoche and teaching us. I have a question on behalf of my discussion group, and this goes back to the Tranquility Meditation. We were wondering why the Ninth Karmapa taught on focusing without an object, in other words, unsupported shamatha. Before he talked about meditating on breath as an object. What was the significance of that?
De la consulgi discussion group nana de la Jacopa gi tampor temegi shine tenre teje su luna tene shine kon sumre teme de ngundu shebe junsen kais.
당보 데라 즈블라 템바타 테네 다 디제소 단다 다트 로리 라 템바타 테네 디제소 싱게 살와타 디제소 테미 세나 다디 테미다 테미가 당보제 감 야 테미 테좀 템보 마주나 롱라 테네 센스 바테 감 teacher ti temi de ngani ga long la tin sense ba ti ji li ga ya te ya temi de ya po chong na tin long la tin sense ma gu pa da bo temi de ya te chom tempo ma ju na te la kham be ki che to long la tin sense ba ti ga le rin do
first he teaches that you do tranquility meditation on an external form, and then on the sound and smell and the other sensory objects. And then he teaches how to eliminate the obstacles of dullness and agitation. And following that, he teaches the unsupported tranquility meditation. And so at that point, if your unsupported tranquility meditation does not turn out so well, then following that, there are the instructions on teaching on breath. And so if your unsupported shamatha, if your unsupported tranquility meditation is good, then you don't need to meditate upon the breath. If your unsupported tranquility meditation is not good, then there are the instructions on how to meditate upon the breath. And so here, if your instructions are not good, then if your unsupported tranquility meditation is not very stable, then you can use the instructions on meditating on the breath.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rinpoche. I know it's getting rather late. But I have a question, sir, about the section on recognizing the nature of moving mind. And it was said that when we look at thoughts and they disappear, that is not really recognizing the essence of mind. And if I can read my notes, there's something about looking at the arising of thoughts. It's not experienced as arising. And then the text says something about thoughts arise and subdue at the same time. Could you kindly clarify and perhaps teach a little more about what it actually feels to recognize the nature of the moving mind?
Dela judo la tawa kapsu dela sem kebe kapsu sem jisnangaran yapo komaso tene de Rinpoche ki
yapo magona joajita.
That's de semgi namdo kebe kapsu dela semgi namdo ke de semgi ngo mare sinde namdo ke de 카레스가 데 남도 케베 가서 데 semgi de ngo kiema nyongore songore de kiema nyongode ane gain stene de la I'm sorry, the second part of your question, after the thoughts that aren't arising after
well, the first part is that when you said that when you actually look at it and the thoughts disappear, that's not seeing the nature of mind. But then you went on to say something about arising is actually experienced as not arising. And then the text says something about arising and subduing at the same time?
Did so tene some la tebe ta na de sem namto la tebe kaso namto la ta na de namto de yeldo na this semgi namto kingo ta mares tene de sem namto kebe kaso de kiema nyongwa re songre tene de kaso tene ti na la tene de keo ta yawa de ane keo ta kaba de 두념도 열에 송마를
지금거니 두념가 미사를 상으로 단다 지니 야로와데 얄 동보 지송 되니 얄송 섬나 되게 생기네로데 도요 말봐 다 그런 지단게 제기요래 얄기요래 데 논술고 온듯이 봐봐 다 가리지기 요래세나 가린 통국이 요래세나 너도 맞지봐 남도 지바데 통술레 군접레 동아레 데 땡고마시나 남도 지요 말에 남도 단다 네바탄 조아니를 체버시로 요 말이라 네바탄 조아니를 체버 메바데 남도 가나지인도 간디시지인도 다도 되니 남도 제사다 남도 지ngo다 남도 가사 된주 니게요 말에 대 많이 받을 가르치나 코란 돈이 제 많이 원다고 지금 온도 세대 땡겨 알아. 제 che manuala tene ti niege yo marila tini ti machi ba yimba ti koranta tan ngaranso che buanda bo che choi buanda bo che jiba nyom ti jiba no hargi yo ma to ngene china che mundu wa sombe nyom nyom che ba Kiena tapena meto ndabo chena ndina na chendo meto ngo ndendo kado ndendo sonsi che ta namto kandi chendo ta namto ana chendo sajan dana chendo tini chesul ndende chendo chipe ngo ndendo soni nya me barwa Quien qua tu ji sing ja yo man.
And got that angatis.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember about the arising and subsiding at the same time. I couldn't remember how that is in the text exactly, and probably didn't translate it correctly back into Tibetan. So Rinpoche wasn't sure about that one. But in terms of in terms of when you have the thoughts that arise and then the thought stops, and if you just look at it and that's all that you see, that is not seeing the essence of the thought, because that is just seeing how the thoughts appear. That is just seeing how the thoughts appear. And so that is just sort of seeing the way they are in the relative truth. It's not really seeing how they are. And so when we say that the thought is something that is not arise, or something that that hasn't arisen, or that doesn't arise, or is not experienced as an arising, is sometimes we have times that thoughts arise. And if the thought has arisen and we look at it and then it stops, that's not looking at the essence of the mind. And when the thought has not yet arisen, then that is pretty much the same. So at the time that the thought has not arisen, at that time it's more or less the same as looking at the mind in stillness. There is not a whole lot of distinction. And then at that time there is the thought that arises. And when the thought arises, where does it arise from? Where does it arise to? Where does it stay? What is it like? What is its color like? And so at that point you can't find any place that it comes from. You can't find any place that it goes to. You can't find any way that it exists. And so in that sense it is not experienced as arising. And so this is, it's not experienced as arising. When it arises, you cannot find any place that it comes, or any place that it goes, or any way that it is. So you cannot really actually say that it arises. It's like bubbles in water. You cannot really say where they come from or where they go to. They come and they go, and so that you can't really say where they are. And so when you look at that, And so when the water bubbles happen, we look at them and we think that there's something there that's a bubble. But if you look at it, there is nothing that's the essence of the bubble. It's empty. There's nothing in there. So we look at it and we think that there's something that's there, but really there isn't anything that's there. And in the same way, we think when a thought arises that there is something that in that thought. Something solid in that thought, but really there's nothing there. There's nothing there that we can find. And so if we look at that, then we realize that then we can actually come to experience that thoughts, that these thoughts do not have any arising. And so we can really come to see that. For example, if you have a flower that's growing here, you can look at the flower and you can say, here's where it's planted, here is where it's coming up, here's where the pot is, the flower pot is, here's where the color is, and all these things. And this is where it is. But if you look at a thought when it arises, there's no way you can say this is how it arises, this is where it arises, this is where it stays, this is where it goes, this is where it comes from. And so there's just no way to find any of that.
Thank you.
좋아요래.
Are there any more questions?
야야.